Hi, this is Cindy Matthews. I am a PhD candidate, soon to be PhD, from Texas A&M University Commerce in the Psychology, Counseling, and Special Education Department. My dissertation, which was recently successfully defended, was on second-generation adult former cult group members' recovery experiences and the implications for counseling. That is, those who were born and raised in cults, who were able to leave their groups, and their recovery experiences and how counselors can help them. My research was qualitative in nature, where I was able to obtain the data from the participants and be able to break the data into categories, themes, and then into grounded theory. I had 15 participants that I was able to obtain through purposeful sampling, a snowball method mostly, and it was grounded theory research. That is the first of its kind regarding second generation cult recovery survivors. I was able to successfully defend my dissertation with the help of Dr. Salazar, Dr. Robinson, Dr. Ball, and Dr. Waller from Texas A&M University Commerce. A week after defending my dissertation, I was able to go to Montreal to the International Cultic Studies Association Convention Conference, where I was able to present my data. And it was well received by the members of ICSA, or International Cultic Studies Association. And those who were on my reference list of my dissertation were actually there and supported my research, such as Dr. Michael Langoni, the executive director, Carol Giambalvo, Lorna Goldberg, who work with second-generation recovery survivors, Dr. Steve Hassan, Gilly Jenkinson, David Clark, those who do research and work with those who are cult recovery survivors. It was very exciting to meet with them and to have my research well received. My background came about as I was working at Texas A&M University Commerce, and I had two clients who were second-generation cult recovery survivors. I went to look at the research, and I found that there was actually nothing written for those born and raised in cults and how to work with them. Also, growing up, the images of the Jonestown Massacre were very much in my head, and my thoughts were of those who were raised and born within this group and left, what happened to them. Also, specifically being from Texas, being aware in Waco of David Koresh and his followers, and wondering what happened to those people, especially the survivors and those who left the group.
You know, the question is, what am I doing? What am I doing with all these children? You know, what's really going on here?
Also, being in Texas, not only David Koresh, but Warren Jeffs with the El Dorado Ranch and the FLDS there, as the children were taken away and some left and many were returned. And my thoughts were always about, what about the children? What happened to them? And as adults, if they left, were they able to successfully integrate into society?
Last week, the Texas Supreme Court found child welfare officials overstepped their bounds in seizing every minor. The expectation was FLDS kids would be reunited with parents.
What is a cult? Margaret Singer in 2003 came up with 7 different criteria, and I used these criteria to work with and come up with a group of individuals who I used as participants in my research. And these 7 criteria are: a cult, and I was working with religious cults, is an all-encompassing movement to which members devote a majority of time and energy. It's headed and created by a self-appointed, who they claim was God, leader who proclaims to be in contact with a supernatural being or has supernatural powers. And it's organized around the members' devotion to the leader and to the organization itself. It also has a leader who tells its members, either explicitly or implicitly, to lose relationships with the outside world, including those with friends and family. And the outside world is seen as inferior. The cult teaches its members that they are part of an elite group. It's an us versus them type of mentality. And it causes any of its members harm, and this can be physical, social, or emotional harm. And this was true for all 15 participants. and it's an organization where members spend time together on a daily basis. Now, some of these individuals in my study lived together in a compound environment, others did not, but spent time still together on a daily basis. When I did my literature review on cults, I found that most of the literature dealt with first-generation cult members in their joining experience, being in the cult, leaving, and then it talked about specifically for counselors how to help them return to their former self, reconnecting, rediscovering, reintegrating, relearning, remembering, and restoring the former self. Of course, those born and raised in cults cannot do that because they don't have a former self, and they've never been a part of the outside world. So my research questions were, what's the process whereby second generation come to the decision to leave? What problems do they have while leaving? And what problems and issues do they have after they leave, specifically right after they leave and then today? I was able to conduct initial interviews by Skype and in person with my participants, which were across the country, and second interviews as well. After the research was gathered, formulated into themes and into theory, I was able to do member checking through emails, Skype, telephone, and in person. I was also able to collect other data through written answers to interview questions, blogs, and written memoirs. In the results, I came up with 15 different themes. The first 8 were themes which worked for every single participant, and the last 4 were overarching themes which integrated all throughout the first 8 themes. I'm only going to touch on a couple themes which are very different for second generation versus first generation. In a first generation family, an individual leaves a family and moves into the cult. And so when they come out, they're welcomed back by their family. When a second generation person leaves the cult, they're also losing and leaving behind their parents and family. In the cult itself, the parents had full authority over the children, and the parents put the children's needs secondary to the cult. Teenagers leaving rebel against both parents and the cult itself, whereas those who are older when they leave tend to rebel mostly against the cult. Those leaving with parents found the transition smoother than those who left their parents behind, which can be a very emotionally straining process. Most participants who left their parents behind in the cult, they were very angry with their fathers because their fathers tended to represent the cult. Every single one of them talked about the patriarchal relationship within the cult, which was one of the initial themes, and how the father represented the cult. So they were angry at the father and at the cult. But it was a very confusing relationship with mothers because mothers were nurturing in this patriarchal role and loved their children, but they also loved the cult. And often these mothers would go behind the back of the father through texting or meeting, and it was a very confusing relationship for those who left the cult, leaving their mothers behind. Parents continued to put the cult first after their children left, and the children found, who were now adults, that they had to have guarded conversations with their parents, otherwise the parents would continue to harangue them about coming back to the cult. Interesting quote about somebody, one of the participants who'd left and tried to maintain a relationship with her father. She said, "I just had to lower my expectations with my relationship with my dad. It's not going to be a Hallmark card. The church is the only thing that matters to him." So for counselors, they need to understand that clients are working through the past abuse of the cult, of their family, and they have family of origin issues at the same time and working through a very complicated relationship. And counselors can help clients cope with the anger, pain, and grief of leaving parents behind. It's not going to be a Hallmark card, and it really isn't going to have a very happy ending. It's going to be working through the different issues that come up. Another theme, which was an overarching theme, which went through all the different themes, was a sense of identity. Individuals who are born and raised are taught how to be and who they are in the cult. The personalities are formed in the cult. And most had 2 personalities, one in the cult and one on the outside when they would have to interact with people outside. Some left because they didn't fit the cult personality. But once they left, they felt lost and confused. Who am I? And had to redefine themselves. And they reported feeling lost, confused, different, behind, and very childlike. They didn't know who they were. They felt very much like a child and naive to the outside world. but every single one of them talked about being glad to discover their true personality without the cult. Quote was, I had to find and recognize an inner voice. They talked about their inner self, or their inner voice was the one that they had to hide in the cult. At first I ignored it in the cult. I wasn't allowed to, and I couldn't follow my gut. I'm trying to learn to recognize it now. I feel it in my gut, and this was what this individual was talking about, the true self, learning to recognize it. And another individual said the fake person is gone, talking about the cult persona. For counselors, they can encourage an exploration of personality and the authentic self, and expect confusion, depression, and feelings of alienation in self-exploration. They can normalize that process for their clients. The other themes I'm not going to go into, but they will lead to further study, and specifically for future study I'll be looking at trauma and abuse of second generation, male versus female experiences, gay and lesbian former cult members, and parenting issues for second generation former members, because the only parenting they've ever seen is by the abusive type in the cult, and how to help them come up with new parenting solutions. Again, this is Cindy Matthews, and you can contact me at cinderzam@verizon.net. Thank you for listening to my presentation.